Hey everyone, before we get started with our workshop, I wanted to do a quick overview, just a little bit about myself for those of you who may be new or may have never seen me before. So my name's Matthew Kanar, and I currently serve on the TAMU SHPE board for the 2019-2020 academic year, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as your Director of Technical Affairs. I am the class of 21, and I study computer science. The goal of this workshop is to help provide the necessary information and skills to learn a little bit more about front-end development, but also apply those into a practical sense in developing your own personal portfolio. I really hope that you all enjoy the material that we'll discuss and hopefully get something new, but also have something cool that you can actually show off to your friends and gain some skills that are not only applicable to your time in university, but also very useful in industry. With that all said and done, let's get started. Hey team, first off, welcome to our first ever video recap of our web development workshop. This is mainly for those who weren't able to attend, but those who did attend, thank you very much. And this is also going to be a follow-up on where we left off and also go a little bit more in depth on the material covered this past Tuesday. So what are we going to be doing? So we're going to be learning HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap essentials, discuss item placement, web page flow and styling, and lastly we'll create our personal portfolio. So what is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it allows for web content to be displayed. They contain elements which serve as the building blocks for pages, and elements are represented by the angled bracket tags. So an HTML element contains a start and end tag with content in between. Here we can see an example with a tag called P, and our content is hello world, and then we close that off with a /. And we have an H1 tag contains content which says this is a heading. Along with this, elements can contain attributes which provide more information about that element, but also information that's helpful for the browser. Here we have a tag called meta with an attribute called charset. We don't really need to concern ourselves with what that means. That's actually information that's helpful to the browser. And then we have an H1 tag with an attribute called class denoted by head. And then we have a P tag with the attribute ID denoted with the name element. We'll actually discuss a little bit later about the significance of classes and IDs and really how to use those. So here we have a sample HTML document. You can just take a quick glance and see how the browser processes it, but I'm going to switch over to my text editor real quick and we're actually going to see this in action. So here we have our HTML document, and if I actually go to the folder where this file's in and open it, you'll notice that this is how the browser will process the code that you specify in the text editor. So one thing you can notice right off the bat is what is visible to us is actually what's contained within the body tags. As we see our heading and our two paragraphs. And also within the head tags, you can also notice that we don't see anything about meta charset at all. You might be wondering, like, where's page title? Because notice that there is content within these title tags. So actually where this goes, this will actually go into the tab for the web browser. Here we actually have a tab called page title since we specified the title of our document. Again, this is just an explanation of the sample provided. So we actually have our HTML declaration at the very top. So this is going to tell the document, like, hey, this is an HTML document, but also letting the browser know that this is HTML and this is how I want this to be processed. Along with that, we have a language specification within the HTML tag. So we can specify a wide variety of languages that we want the document to support. And here we see the meta charset. Again, this is like info for the browser, and it's actually specifying a character encoding for the document. And we have our title tags, which specifies the title for the document and also is visible to us in the tab of our browser. And this is actually where we see the meat and potatoes of our document within the body tag. So this contains our visible content, and here we are seeing a large heading that we're specifying and then paragraph content that we're wanting. So we have this is a heading, paragraph, and another paragraph. And then lastly, we close this all off with our closing HTML tag. So here's actually a visual structure of HTML document. So you can actually see that things are grouped together. So we actually have our title and our browser information grouped within the head tag, and you can actually see it in the little picture. It's just specifying, like, I want to contain information about the browser, but also the page title for the document within the head tag. And here we can actually see we're actually grouping all our visible content together within the body tags, as you can see by the visual. Again, we have our heading, paragraph, and another paragraph, and then we close it off with our HTML tags. So we've been talking about tags, but we haven't specifically said, like, what are they? So we've seen this one a few times. We've seen heading, we see heading 1, but there's actually more. So we have heading 1 through 6, and this goes from most to least important. like, what does this mean? Does it not do anything, or what's up with that? So we're actually going to see this in action. You see, we have a heading 1 right here called this is a heading. We'll actually specify heading 1 through 4. Just change this up to heading 2, 3, and so on. Then we save our document, refresh the page, and now we see we have 4 more headings. And this is actually where we see the most to least important in action. So heading 1 is specifying this is the most important. I want this to be the largest font size. And as we actually go down, while the text is still bold, the actual font size gets smaller and smaller. And as we see with heading 4, it looks almost like a paragraph tag with just bold text. Again, we've been seeing the paragraph tag a lot here in our example. We have this is a paragraph. One thing we haven't seen yet is links. So this actually lets us specify a destination we want a piece of text to take us to. So here we have denoted by the A tag, and there's actually an attribute called hyperlink reference that you can specify by the destination that you want a particular link to go to or have a piece of content redirect us to. So back in our document, we're going to specify our A tag. And then we're going to put our hyperlink reference, and we'll put http TAMU SHPE.org, and then our content will be this is a link. If we refresh the page, we're going to have a link here now. And the way you know this is a link actually is the actual text is going to be blue and underlined. On my case, it's purple because I've clicked on it already. Sorry for killing the fun, y'all, but when you actually click on this, it will redirect us to another page, and you can actually guess what this will be. It'll redirect us to tamushpe.org. However, you might be like, okay, that's pretty neat, Matt, but like, can I make it just open up in a new tab? Because I don't want to keep on clicking the back button. And I'm glad you asked, because we can actually do that. So along with the hyperlink reference attribute, there's also another attribute called target. And this is just specifying, like, what do I want to happen on this action when I click on this link? And to actually specify that we want this link to open up in a new tab, we're going to specify our target as _blank. I won't really need to explain what this does. You'll actually see what happens. So once we refresh our page, we now see that our link opens up in a new tab, and we don't have to click on the back button anymore to get back to where we need to be. We can just go right between the tabs up top. So there's going to be some more tags we'll discuss. We have images. It's denoted by image, and this just, as it sounds, it allows us to put images in our document. Here we have attributes called source and alt. So source is just going to be specifying the destination that this image is in, and then alt is just, again, information for the browser. It's just a nickname for that image. Here we have buttons. It's exactly like it sounds. It creates a button on the screen, and you can click on it, and you can specify, like, what action do I want to happen on this click. Along with that, we have lists. There's OL or UL. OL stands for ordered list, and then the other stands for unordered list, with the actual list content denoted by the LI tag. Here we can actually see how this works. So here we're going to make an unordered list. We're going to put our list content. We'll specify like three things we want in our list. So I'm just going to list out some of my favorite things to do. So I'm going to put play trumpet, running, and then being a ship member. And if we refresh, we actually have our list right here. And the reason why it's called unordered is because the ordered list actually specifies a number to the bulleted list. Here, an unordered list is just a bulleted list. So we can actually see the ordered list in action. We'll just change this to OL. And then we'll say that, like, we'll list some tasks that we need to do from ranking from most to least important. So we'll say study for finals, hang out with friends, and then the most least important thing we'll be doing is we'll say, like, play video games. We refresh our browser. Now we see we have an ordered list and ranking some items we need to do from most to least important. So we've been talking about all these tags in HTML, but you might be wondering, like, how do we actually style this? We actually have a thing called CSS, and this stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It allows us to style HTML content, and it consists of a selector and a declaration block, and it has a name and a value separated by a colon, which is then terminated by a semicolon. Here in the little snippet, you can see we have our selector. We're selecting the P tag, and then in our curly braces, that's actually our declaration block. And here you can actually see various attributes that we're specifying that we want on how to style this particular paragraph tag. Here we have various attributes like font size, color, and also how do we want to align the text. So here you can actually see a sample CSS document. And one thing you can notice that's new is if you actually look at the very top on the third line, we have a new tag called length. This is actually an equivalent to, for those of you who have programmed in maybe like Python, Java, or C++, to our hash include or import statements. We're just essentially saying here that I want to reference a item called style sheet, but this style sheet I want to reference is a CSS document that I made. And so this will actually allow us to apply our styling to the document. So if we actually go back to our sample here I have in our HTML document, I have this commented out, but we're actually referencing our style sheet right here. Again, you're just going to use the link tag. You're going to specify with the rel attribute that it's a style sheet and that the type, it's a text CSS document. Again, you'll have a hyperlink reference which will redirect us to our styling. In my case, my style sheet's in a folder, so I have CSS, which is the folder name, followed by the actual name of the document. If you have your HTML file and CSS in the same folder, you don't need to worry about this, but in my case, I will. So there's nothing there, but let's style our paragraph tag. So here we're going to say paragraph. Let's say I want a really big font size. So I'll say like 150 pixels. And I want my text color to be magenta. And I want to align my text centered to the page. And if we actually go back to here and refresh this, you'll see that the styling has been applied to our paragraph tags. So we see our paragraphs have been centered, our text color has been changed to magenta, and we've also increased the font size significantly. So one thing that's really important about CSS is the box model. So it's what wraps around HTML elements, and it consists of margins, padding, the border, and content, and then the actual padding margins are transparent, and then the border and content are visible. So it's going to be a little hard for us to see this just by this sample, so we'll actually switch right on over to our document. So here we styled our paragraph tag. Let's style our heading tags now. So we'll style heading 1. And we'll actually change our background color to just blue, have it be a little bit easier to see. And we'll make our font size, let's say 50 pixels, and we'll have our text align be justify. Color, and if we go right here, we now see our heading is now changed to blue background, and we've also increased the font size. I'm going to change the color. It might be a little hard to see. We'll say teal. There we go. We got teal. And we can also specify a border we want around. This is actually the first thing in the box model we can see. So I want my border to be 15 pixels around. I want it to be solid, and I want the color to be, I guess, a good color that would juxtapose teal, I guess. We'll say, like, we'll go with magenta again. And here we have our border now, which is magenta. It's 15 pixels around, and it's actually surrounding our heading tag. So if we actually open up our Chrome debugger, so you can actually do a function F12 or just press F12 on your keyboard, and you'll actually be able to see how the overall document would look on just various types of devices. Here we're just going to be looking on a laptop. And if we open this up again, and we'll want to select the element that we want to observe. Here we can actually see the box model in play. If you look right down here in the close to the bottom right hand corner of the actual Chrome debugger, we can actually see our main content, which is this is a heading right here. So here we can actually see our heading. We don't have any padding, but we do have a border specified, so it's specifying the border and there's default margins, but we haven't specified any ourselves. So the way padding is important is it actually allows us to position our actual content within the border. So here we can go back to our document, we'll specify a padding, and we'll say, well, we want like 10 pixels. And you'll actually notice, once I refresh the page, the actual content within the border will be slightly offset. Not by much, not very significant. We can make the number slightly bigger, just have a bigger change. Save that again, we'll change it to 100 pixels, refresh. And we see that we have actually changed the padding quite significantly. Here we see we have our content, but we also added 100 pixels around our content. And our border appears to have gotten smaller. It still remains 15 pixels. And we can also style the overall element which contained within the border relative to other elements using margins. Here if we actually change the margin, so if we save this, and here we see we have 150 pixels all around right here. So the one thing to take note about padding is when we look at our debugger, padding is what allows us to position our content within the border, and the margins is what allows us to actually position that particular element relative to other elements. And here's a sample box model where you can imagine you have an HTML document and we're just selecting our div tag. We're specifying some width, border, padding, and margins. Shows how our browser will process the styling that we're applying to that element. So one thing we've seen already is style sheet selectors. However, there's actually more than just what we've been using, which is element selectors. So they allow us to find HTML elements that we want to style, and there's various types. So we've seen element, so it selects an HTML element based off that element name. And also there's ID, so it selects an HTML element based off an ID, and this is actually where ID and classes come into play. To select this in CSS, it's actually denoted by a hash followed by the ID name, and then class, we're able to select HTML elements based off a class name. This is selected with a period followed by the class name. And then lastly, we have the universal selector, which selects all elements in the document denoted by an asterisk. One thing to note about ID is it should be used very sparingly, just because it's something that should be unique to an element within a page, so the ID selector selects one unique element and rather not multiple elements. Here we can go back over to our document and see this in action. So let's give our heading 3 class, we'll call it small, and then our heading 4, we will give it an ID of, we'll just call it sum. And if we actually go back to our style sheet, we can then select those classes. So we're going to say class with a period, small. And then we want to select our ID, and we're going to say hash sum. So here we want our small, we'll give it a font size of like 5 pixels, and I want my text color to be purple. For sum, I want to give it a font size of 20 pixels. I want my color to be maroon. And then I want to position my text differently, so I want it to say text align center. So just a quick recap, we have our small class in our heading 3, and then we have our sum ID in heading 4. And if we go on right over, so this is heading 3 and 4, well, we should see a change now in this. So here we see that we have centered our heading 4, and we've given it maroon text, and also changed the font size. Here in the little teeny tiny corner, we have heading 3. As you can see, we've changed the actual color of the font and also the font size, so it's almost unreadable. This is how you actually utilize class and ID selectors, and that's actually the purpose that they serve within an HTML document. It allows us to select a certain attribute to a particular element that we want to style specifically. Because one thing you may have noticed is with the p tag selector, we were styling all paragraph elements. However, if we were to assign class small to our this is a paragraph content, you would notice on the browser that this would actually become almost unreadable. As you can see, it's right here. So one thing that there is selector precedence, and it's specificity of selectors from highest to lowest. And you might be like, what does this mean? So actually the selectors you use, they have a hierarchy to them in terms of which is most important, least important. The best example that can actually be applied to this is you can actually think of them as addresses. So both of them could give you the same destination. However, one might give you directions that say go here, turn around here, go here for a few feet. Versus while another can tell you, like, okay, you need to go to this building, turn on this street, stop at this building, go to this sign. And they both give you the same destination, however, one is more specific than the other. So again, we said that the selectors have a hierarchy going from highest to lowest. So the one that sits king is IDs, and that's noted from the previous slide, as we said that IDs should be used sparingly and only for elements that are unique to that page. Then we have classes, and then also pseudo classes. And we have elements, which such as div, and then pseudo elements. Don't worry about that. So actually, to determine which has highest precedence, you'll actually compare the number of occurrences of single selectors with combined selectors according to the rules above. So here we have an example, and we are asked, like, which has higher precedence? And here you might look and like, well, they both have an ID, so they should be the same. But like I said, we need to actually compare the single selectors based off the rules provided. So we see, okay, they both have one ID, so far so good. Let's move on down the hierarchy and let's look at classes. So we see that the one on the left has the hover pseudo class, and the one on the right has the active class. So we're okay, they both have one class each. So now let's look at the elements. So the one on the left, we have three elements. We have the UL, LI, and A. However, on the right, we have four elements on the right. We have the UL, LI, A, and then the after pseudo class. And because of that, the one on the right will take highest precedence. And the reason why is because this is actually providing more specific directions to a particular location. So here we have a sample of some CSS selectors, and we're going to try to identify some of these. Here at the top, one thing we've noticed is that whenever it starts with a period followed by a name, we know that this is a class selector. When we see the hash followed by a name, we know this is an ID selector. And when we just select the actual literal tag, HTML tag itself, we know that this is an element selector. So we can actually group selectors together, and this actually prevents redundancy within our code. Here you can see an example. We're actually applying the same styling to three different HTML elements. However, it's just a lot of lines and for no apparent reason, so we can actually group those together and just in a comma separated list. So that's saying I want to style my H1, H2, and paragraph elements because we're applying the same exact style to them. Here we can actually increase specificity on our styling. So here we can switch on over. We'll clear on out some of the previous styling we had. So we'll give our paragraph classes, so we'll give this one class small. So we're going to style all of our paragraph tags. So we're going to give them a color of maroon. Then we're going to change our font size to 50 pixels. And we'll give it a background color of gray. If we refresh our page, we'll see that we've selected our two paragraph elements and applied a certain styling to them. However, I want to have a certain paragraph be different from everyone else. So we're going to give this the class special, so we'll say SPEC, spec. And I want to give this paragraph a different styling from the rest. So we can actually select our paragraph. However, I want to only look at paragraph elements that contain the special class. Here we can change its color to forest green. We'll have font size be 100 pixels. And also we'll change our background color to navy blue. When we save this, don't forget to save your document. We'll actually see that our special paragraph will change, even though in our styling sheets, we've been selecting all the paragraphs. Again, we see the precedence being played into effect here because while we are specifying that we want to style paragraph elements, this one is actually far more specific because we actually want to style all paragraph elements that contain the special class. And that is why it's applying these stylings to this, since this contains the special class versus unlike this paragraph element, which does not contain a class at all. So it's going to apply the default styling that we've provided to all paragraph elements. So what is Bootstrap? We've talked about HTML and CSS and just one more thing to go. So it's a popular CSS framework, and it's actually great for developing responsive and mobile-first websites. The best way to put it is it marries HTML and CSS into one package, and it's actually a really powerful tool because it does a lot of the work for us, since Bootstrap, as we'll see, has predefined classes with built-in CSS into it. So why responsive web design? So it allows this page to look good on all devices, from small desktops, phones, and tablets. It resizes accordingly, and it just straight up looks good. So a great example to see of a responsive website is the TAMU SHPE website. As we can see here, it looks fine and dandy. We'll switch on over to our sponsorship page. Here it looks good and all, but if we notice as we resize our browser, not only will the content resize appropriately, but also it'll still keep it in the same position so that it's still readable. As we can see, we can also open up our Chrome debugger again, and we can see how our page looks on various types of devices. So here, let's see how it looks on the iPhone 5. Here it still looks pretty good, like all our content is stacked up on each other, page is in the right place, nothing's moving around funny. We can still access all the information that we need. Let's move on over to the iPhone 10. Here, still a responsive website. We can also change the width, or the portrait to landscape, and we still see that the page will fit accordingly to the viewport width. And lastly, we have iPad. Again, go to landscape, and everything still fits. So one of the most important classes in Bootstrap is actually Bootstrap Container. So this actually provides some default padding, margins, and more alignments to the HTML element that you're specifying that class for. And it is denoted by .container class, which provides a responsive fixed width container. And then we have container fluid, which provides a responsive full width container. And here you can see some snippets of code. So if we actually switch on over to our text editor, we can actually see these classes in action. So you might notice there's quite a bit more going on. So we still have our style sheet we're referencing, but at the very top you'll notice that we have another style sheet that we're going to use, and that's going to be using the Bootstrap style sheet, and this will actually allow us to use the built-in styling to it. Again, more information for us to use Bootstrap, and here's actually what's known as the Bootstrap core for a web page. This will actually go typically at the very bottom of the body tag, and this is just more scripting information and some other bits of things that happen behind the scenes that allow us to use our Bootstrap in a page. So to see the containers in action, we're going to specify a div tag, and for those of you using Visual Studio Code, you can say div.container. When you print enter, it'll actually create that class for us. And here we'll say this is some text. And here we'll say div container fluid, and we'll say this is more text. And if we actually open up our page in the browser, you might notice that the text is a little off, but you might have trouble saying, like, okay, like what exactly is going on here? I don't quite see the container and container fluid right off the bat. So if we actually select our container class, let's give it a background color of teal, and then just copy this over, and then we'll specify our container fluid. We'll give it a background color of magenta. Then we'll just apply the same text alignment to it, so we'll say text align center, and then text align center. Save this, make sure everything looks good, open it up in the browser, and we can actually see this in a little bit, visualize this a little bit better. So we'll change the padding up a little bit just so it takes up a little bit more of our screen. So we'll specify 50 pixels for both. And here we go. So we have our text, but this is actually where we see the difference between container and container fluid. So container actually provides a fixed width with predefined margins, padding, and whatnot. And so this is actually why it is, quite as the name implies, it's within a container. versus container fluid, which, as you can imagine, with the name fluid attached to it, that it has more wiggle room. And as we can see here, it actually takes up the full width of our browser. And here, this is actually where you see the responsiveness coming into play. So if we actually minimize this, you'll notice that they are both taking up the full width. And again, this is a lot of things happening behind the scenes with a lot of predefined CSS for Bootstrap to allow this to happen, which is why Bootstrap's a really, really powerful framework to use. Here we saw this example already, but here again you can see we have our container and then a container fluid. It's a little hard to see the actual width of the browser here. So one thing that's really cool in Bootstrap is there's actually a grid system that we can use. So it's built with Flexbox. If you're not sure what Flexbox is, this just essentially allows for responsiveness to a web page, and it allows up to 12 columns across the page, and we can actually group these columns together to create wider ones. We just have to make sure that the sum of the columns does not exceed 12. There's actually 5 different column classes we can use. Column, which is COL, hyphen, and you can specify the size you want. So we have extra small for small devices. It's typically used for mobile. We have small, used for small laptops, medium being laptops, large being desktops, and then extra large. Here we see this in action. You can create 3 equal columns, and it's responsive on all devices. And again, Bootstrap is doing a lot of the work for us here. We can see this in action. So we'll say div.row, since we want to group our columns within a certain row. And I want this to be a column of width 4. And we'll just copy and paste this 3 times. And then we'll say text, text, and text. And just to see us a little bit better, we'll give it another class just to assign some unique colors. So we'll say C1, C2, and C3. Open this up. Here we have our 3 columns right here. And then we'll just say .c1. We'll give it text alignment of center. Then a padding of 50 pixels as well. And then just assign it some background color. Here we'll specify, we'll just keep it white. And we can just copy and paste this. And then we'll just change this to C2, and C3, and we'll just change the color to blue, and then red. Just feeling a little patriotic today. And if we actually switch on over, we will see we have our 3 columns right here, which are of equal width, and just to change the color to better visualize it, all of width 4 still abiding by the does not exceed 12 in width. And again, we see a lot of the built-in Flexbox responsiveness in action when we resize this. So here we're specifying that we want these to take up a width 4 for regardless of whatever device or viewport width we're using. So when we actually resize the browser, we still have our 3 columns stacked right next to each other. Along with that, we can also create responsive columns of unequal width. So we could actually just specify the widths explicitly. So we switch right on over to our document. We can say, okay, I want these to have different widths. So I want to give this 2, that's 4. This one's going to be 6. Make sure the math's right. 2, 4, 6. That all adds up to 12. We're all good to go. Then we'll just open up our page, resize it, and we'll see that it is actually of width 12 and all unequal widths. Here you'll notice some a little bit of jankiness just because it's actually having trouble to fit group all the text and columns together within that same row. And again, this is actually where you can start specifying, okay, like on this type of device, I want my column to take up this much space. So here we're going to specify that I want my column to be of width 2 on laptops and small desktops. So I'm going to specify a size medium. However, when I go to say a smaller device like a mobile device, I want my column to take up width 12. So here we're going to specify column extra small, take up the full given width. So we go right back here. Everything looks fine and all, but as we resize it, we'll notice that it actually takes up the full width since we specified in our HTML that we want this particular column to take up width 12 for mobile-like devices. So there's typography we can actually apply to Bootstrap. So this allows us to style our text without CSS, sorta. So the tags are identical to HTML, and they contain classes to style the text. So some of the classes are, we have font weight bold, italic, light. We can align the text right, left, center, text decoration, none, and justify. So you may have noticed that in the CSS we've been specifying our text alignment. However, we can just totally forget about that actually, because we don't need that anymore. Let's get rid of all of that. Once we get rid of all that, you're gonna notice like, okay, how do we style our text, position it? So we'll actually go back to the particular element we want to style, and we can actually just say text. We apply the text center class. Didn't mean to copy that much, and just apply that to all of our classes here. Save it, take a look, notice that all of our text has become centered once we've applied the text center class. This just really reinforces the fact of how it marries HTML and CSS. Here we can actually give some background colors to our text. So you may have noticed in our CSS we've been specifying background color. I want magenta, XYZ, some sort. There's actually some pre-built classes that will allow us to specify some different colors for our text. This is just specifying a background color for some piece of content. We actually remove our styling to our columns. We can actually see this in action. So I want my background color to be primary. Background, let's say warning. And then background color, danger. If we go here, we'll see that we've actually highlighted and changed the color, the background color of our text without having to explicitly use CSS specifying the background color as we've done previously. So with images, we're actually able to style them with, again, some pre-built classes versus having to actually specify how we want to style that image in our CSS. So we're going to actually see these classes in action. So we're going to switch on them right over to our text editor. Here we have an image we've added called Windows XP. We're going to go right in here and we're going to use our image tag. Specify our source, and we're going to go in our image folder and use Windows XP. If we refresh this, we should now have an image here. However, it's a little too big actually, so let's fix that. So one really powerful class in Bootstrap is there's actually a class called Image Fluid. However, this doesn't mean it takes up the full width like with container fluid. This actually makes your image resize accordingly to the window viewport. Here we've actually trimmed our image a little bit. This class wasn't used fully just because of, so we're going to apply some styling to that. So we're going to say add a class called image. Go right here, image class. We'll change our width to be like 20%. Here we go. Now it's contained within that little window. And also to help with the responsiveness of the image, we'll actually group this in a container. Again, go right back here. So we see everything is all good now. Just need to take away that styling to container just so we can see our image slightly better. There we go. Then we can actually apply the classes that were previously mentioned in the slide just to see how they actually change the image. So we can apply the rounded class, and this will actually trim off some of the corners, making them a little bit smoother. A little hard to tell, but as you can see, we've actually rounded off our corners. Then we also have the rounded circle class. Here it should actually make this more round. There we go. And we also have image thumbnail, which will actually create a thumbnail for it. See, we have a thumbnail border around for this image. Here we actually have buttons in Bootstrap. So we discussed the button tag previously in the HTML. However, now we can actually have some predefined CSS that we can apply to these buttons and to create what we see in the image below. So again, you can use the button, input, or A elements, and here this is the overall structure and the type of classes we have. So if you were to use the button element, you just specify the types of button, and you can give a class to it called button, and this is just saying like, hey, I want to use the button class. And you can also apply background colors to it using the background colors we had discussed previously. So if we actually go on back to our code and say like, let's make a button here. So we'll say button class button, then we'll give it a background color of primary, and then just say this is a button. Open this up, and you see we'll have a button right here. However, it doesn't do anything just because we haven't specified an action, so we can actually give a tag within this and specify a destination for where we want this button to take us. So we'll say A, and then we'll give a hyperlink reference. Let's have it take us to YouTube. So you'll just copy and paste that link, copy into here, save it. Here we have, it's a little hard to read. Let me change that background color. Actually, we'll say danger. There we go. Here we have our button along with our link. So we're specifying an action for this button. So we'll click here and it will take us to YouTube. Lastly, we have Bootstrap progress bars, and this actually allows us to show user progress in a process. It can be used with container elements such as the div element. So you're going to add the progress class to the parent element, and then the actual child element, which is the items that are grouped within a particular element, you'll apply the progress bar class to those child elements. And you can actually style it with inline CSS using the width property, and also again we can actually change the background color using the previously discussed background color class. So we'll see this in action right over to our code. So this is going to be our parent element, so we want to give it the progress class. And their child element, we'll give it the progress bar class. Let me just say, we'll just put some text in here. Go to our browser, see how things come out. And here we have our progress bar. Here we can also change the background color, so we'll say background warning, and then this should actually change to yellow. We can actually use our inline CSS to specify the width we want to apply to this progress bar. So here, let's say this is a particular skill we have, and we're measuring our level of proficiency. So we'll say SolidWorks for you mechanical engineers out there. And we'll give it a width. Let's say we're pretty good at it, but we're going to be a little humble, so we're going to say 90%. So we go here, we now see that from our progress bar, it takes up 90% of the actual bar. And again, this is something you could use on websites just to show, maybe if you had like a skill section and just list levels of proficiency with a particular skill. So that marks the end of our lecture portion of the workshop. I appreciate y'all very much for just taking the time to listen to this. Next up will actually be designing our personal portfolio. So let's get to work.